Well, ladies and gentlemen, Israel is still up to its usual tricks. It appears that Israel is now bombing Syria again, in particular Damascus, and they have raided the West Bank. Now, I want to take you back for just a second to remind you what happened in Syria. There was that overthrow of Assad. During that time, there was somewhat of a split, and some people who were, pro-Palestinian were happy that Assad was overthrown, and others were not. One of the things I tried to warn you about is that this is regime change. And with regime change, the people are usually worse off after regime change than they were before the regime. And now we are starting to see Israel's full plan come into fruition. I told you guys during that time that this was really a win for Israel. And now you're going to see why. So what happens? Israel strikes targets in southern Syria after demanding demilitarization. So does everybody see what's going on now? Israel is demanding that Syria demilitarizes. They do not want people in southern Syria to be able to defend themselves. That's really what this is about. Don't forget, even when I would talk about Gaza, I would continue to tell you, Gaza didn't have a military, right? So that's really what Israel wants. And they also do not want southern Syria to become part of Lebanon. They don't want that merger there as well. And indeed, they do want to go in and take over, which is part of the greater Israel plan. We're going to get into a little bit here from The Guardian. Israeli warplanes have carried out several airstrikes on military targets outside Damascus and in southern Syria. We'll jump down here. Israeli jets struck military sites late on Tuesday in the town of Kiswa, south of Damascus, as well as in the southern province of Deraa. This is according to local Syrian media. The Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, confirmed the strikes in southern Syria and warned that Israel will not allow southern Syria to become southern Lebanon. Katz added that any attempt by Syrian regime forces and the country's terrorist organizations to establish themselves in the security zone of southern Syria will be met with fire. So I think we all see what is happening here. Again, this is after the overthrow of Assad. Now, I have seen this happen before in other countries. Remember, we can talk about the overthrow of Saddam Hussein and what happened there. That gave way for the rise of ISIS. These regime changes do not benefit the people in those areas in the long run, right? So Israel here is getting what they want. They are again going in and attacking Syria. We'll jump down to this part right here. It says that hours before the Israeli bombings on Tuesday, Syria condemned Israel's invasion of the buffer zone and called for it to withdraw its forces from Syrian territory. The statement was issued at the end of a national dialogue conference, which gathered hundreds of Syrian activists and leaders to plan the country's post-Assad political transition. But that country is not going to be able to plan the transition. You know who's going to plan that? Israel and the United States. That's how regime change works. So we have them going into Syria and attacking Syria yet again. And now it appears that there are protests from activists in Syria. Let's go ahead and bring this up here.
أنا من الجولان المحتل يلي الجيش الإسرائيلي أساساً هجر.
I'll read some of this for you. She said the Israeli army, they displaced my father and my grandfather.
من أراضينا، عشنا بالقنيطرة. طبعا كان دائما في نحن عندنا حاجز اللي هو حاجز سعسع، اللي هذا كان يقام على مدار 54 سنة، هو كرمة لإسرائيل.
They said they always had a checkpoint that stood for 54 years, but because of Israel, people from Idlib were banned from entering, right? So this is important. So they're saying that people from Syria couldn't get in without, unless they had a security like checkpoint. The regime fell August 12th and on September 12th. And Israel entered. We do not need Israel to work for us. So does everybody see what's happening here? And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. If they resist this in any way, shape, or form, what do you think Israel is going to do? They'll deem them as terrorists and they'll kill them. See, this is how, and I explained this before, this is how you get a group like Hamas. This is how you get these groups form, because you're not letting these people decide their own fate and their own destiny. You're coming in, is basically colonialism, a brutal, brutal colonialism. You're coming in and you're saying, this is what you are going to do, or we are going to kill you. And the United States government is backing that. The US government agrees with that. How would you feel if someone came to your town and said, this is what you are going to do, or we are going to dispose of you? How would you feel? Always try to put yourself in their shoes. So when I say fool me once, this is one of the things that I was talking about, because the reality is I didn't fall for that. When they said they were going in, oh, we just overthrew Assad, this is great, everyone should be happy. I didn't fall for that, because we know what happens when these leaders are overthrown by the West. We know what's going to come of these people. So this is how you get a resistance. And the history books will skip all that I probably told you, right? They'll only tell you the side that makes Israel look good. And they'll say that these militant groups just rose up and wanted to tear down Israel. And they'll totally leave out the fact that Israel brought it to that point. Israel, she said, is invading our land and they are displacing people from their homes. Same thing that's happening in the West Bank, right? So the same thing that they have been doing, and I warned you would happen, they are now doing it in Syria. So here we go again. So that part is important, and you guys can see that another time. But the base of this is she's telling you that they're taking their weapons away from them. So if they take their weapons away from you, you will not be able to defend yourself. But they still have their weapons. Imagine this, folks. How would you feel if the police all of a sudden in your town showed up one day and started knocking on everyone's doors and say, guess what? We are going to be arms free. Just like you have those dry towns. We're going to be arms free. And that means everybody got to turn in your guns. You don't turn them in, we're taking them. But the police still get to keep their guns. That's not fair. That's what Israel is doing. They're taking that away from them, away from them. And it's not just Syria. We also go to the West Bank, and you need to see what they did there. They are now saying that Israel is turning the West Bank into a mini Gaza. Now, a lot of people will point to this and they'll say, oh, well, don't you guys wish you would have voted for Kamala Harris? No, because Israel was going into the West Bank when Biden and Kamala were in office. This isn't new. They've been going into the West Bank. They've been kicking people out of their homes in the West Bank, stealing their homes, holding people up by gunpoint. This is not new. This has been going on for years. But now what you see happening, and this is why it was so important, that Biden or Kamala would have held them accountable. But what Biden wouldn't say publicly, a lot of people know privately, which is that he supported everything that Israel was doing. This is why it was so important that they should have been the ones to hold Israel accountable. They wouldn't. So you see now going into the West Bank here, look at what they did.
Just a warning that this report contains distressing images and a moment a Palestinian boy is shot who then later died in hospital.
A bulldozer in the Tulkarm refugee camp demolishes homes in emptied-out Palestinian neighbourhoods. It's part of Operation Iron Wall, an Israeli military offensive targeting the northern West Bank with airstrikes, house demolitions and door-to-door raids, launched 2 days after the Gaza ceasefire was agreed.
And the Israeli soldiers did this?
Zainab Qasim shows us how Israeli troops ransacked her neighbour's apartment, ripping through their possessions and firing into walls, holding her children at gunpoint.
I have a daughter with special needs. She couldn't understand what was happening or what it means when a weapon is pointed at her head.
I was so scared. I even started crying. I was worried about my brother. They were so aggressive. They were screaming so much.
The family have had to evacuate 3 times since the operation began.
This has become a mini Gaza. If I showed you the streets just behind that door, you would say this is Gaza.
But let Western media tell it, let the US government tell it, and they'll tell you that the people that you see in the screen, they're the ones that you need to be afraid of. When it's very clear that Israel is the one that is terrorizing these people. And this was the plan. And I said it, and someone mentioned in the chat, thank you for reminding me, when I covered the Jeffrey Sachs speech, he acknowledged this. He talked about this in front of the European Parliament. And he told them, he said, you guys, this was the plan years ago for Israel to take southern part of Syria, part of Lebanon, to recapture, claim the West Bank, and to take Gaza. That is the part of the great. Now, what is not mentioned often, you don't hear Netanyahu saying this, but if you look at that map again, that greater Israel map, it also looks like it includes part of Jordan. So this is what the plan has been. It's colonialism. This is brutal. And we have Congress people, we have politicians that say, I stand with Israel and always Israel on both sides. So you can't point fingers and say it's just the Republicans. You can't point fingers and say it's just the Democrats. No, it's both of them. This is what they support, including some of the black ones. So you have black politicians supporting colonialism. Make that make sense.
It's not on the scale of Gaza, but critics say the operation is a compensation of sorts to the extremist right wing who didn't want the Gaza war to end and who are holding up Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition. And it has already displaced 40,000 people.
Israel says this is about rooting out militant groups to make sure that another October the 7th doesn't originate from the West Bank. But if you look at the destruction, the fact that they've bombed homes, destroyed the infrastructure, taken out the water systems, the electricity, it looks very much like the ultimate aim is to make it impossible for Palestinians to return.
And that's right. That is ultimately what the goal is. You heard what she just said? So again, when I say fool me once, Israel doesn't want peace. They've showed us over and over again that they don't. But they also don't want people in Syria, Gaza, or any of these other, they don't want them to be able to have any weapons. They don't want them to be able to defend themselves, but they can continue to have weapons and go in and terrorize the community and the people. And people support it. And people support it because that's what they're paid to do. I want you to hear what this gentleman said on News Nation. Listen to this.
do want to get your take on some breaking news that my producers are telling me in my ear. It's just coming down right now. Israel, for the first time in decades, sending tanks into the West Bank, saying fleeing Palestinians cannot return. Israel moving into the occupied West Bank, as we said, for the very first time in decades. Palestinian authorities are calling this a dangerous escalation. Can you give us any color or context here?
They haven't previously used tanks in the West Bank. There is unrest in the West Bank, but all of this is associated with the larger issue of what's the future of Israel and how does it go about? It's still got troops in Lebanon. Hamas has not been defeaed. Hamas still has hostages. There's a phase 2 to be done. Iran is weak. President Trump is a strong supporter of Bibi Netanyahu. So what is the future? And there are strong forces in Israel that said, get rid of the Palestinians, go for a one-state solution. And so this has to be viewed as a step in that direction.
Okay. He said the quiet part out loud. They are moving towards a one-state solution, meaning they are trying to cleanse the land. Because what's going to happen is, if you're not willing to live under Israel's rule and their law, they're going to get rid of you. And they're going to push them. So give it an amount of time before they start telling the people in southern Syria, yeah, you guys got to go too. It is very upsetting. It's disturbing. And it's one of those situations where I feel really helpless. And you'll even see Stephen Witkoff. He's going to say it out loud here, what the real plan is. I mean, they're not being quiet about it. They're not.
In terms of the Iranian crescent, it's basically been decimated. Look at what's happened with Syria. No one ever thought that that was going to happen. We've got an epic election in Lebanon. And so tons of things happening. Lebanon, by the way, could actually normalize and come into the Abraham Peace Accords, as could even potentially Syria. So many profound changes are happening there, and yet it's been a flashpoint of conflict. And I think that there's a possibility that we end it.
So let me explain to you what he's really saying when he says, oh, it's an opportunity that they can come into the Abraham Accords. What that means is that Israel is going to take over that land. Because of all of these, there have been so many. One second. Sorry about that. There have been so many, chances here, right? So many different agreements that have been on the table. Don't forget about the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, which Israel rejected. There have been a number. But the reality is, Israel wants their own agreement, and that's the one that they want in place. They're not willing to sign any agreement that is going to benefit the Arab people. There's no equality here. Forget equity. There's no equality. There's none. And you can't be a citizen. And I got to say this. You cannot be a citizen of the United States and be okay with that. And you can't sit up there and stand and say, I'm fighting for Black Lives Matter if you agree with what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people and the Syrian people. You can't be okay with that. You're joking, right? Think about that. Think about that when you see some of your politicians who say, oh, we got to protect people here. We got to do this. And they'll stand up and say, we need equality. We have to fight for equality. But they are voting for legislation that is against that. They're all bought and paid for. Never forget that. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.